Hello and welcome back to Crushing Comics. I'm your host Peter, and we are here to fall in love with my comic book collection all over again. You will notice this shelf behind me is starting to fill up very nicely. We're now done 6 blocks out of 20 as we continue to unpack my oversized collection. So let's just forge on to the next block. Here we go. It's not like me to have a shirt of a sexualized woman on, so I feel like this requires some explanation. This is actually one of my favorite drag queens, Bendis. Fantastic. I love drag as an art. It's interesting that I didn't just come to it in the modern day with things like RuPaul's Drag Race, but I came to it actually partially via RuPaul, who I remember from the early 90s as she started to like really hit mainstream. But I have always loved drag. Maybe it's because I grew up in Philadelphia and there were mummers, which so often were in drag. Gosh, the mummers. That could be its own episode. It's kind of like a holiday parade for the New Year's, but it's involves a lot of people dressed up as clowns and wenches, and historically it was almost all male, so there was a lot of cross-dressing in that. I don't know how to explain it. Maybe it's just because I was a big Wonder Woman fan and I thought it was cool to have anybody dressed up as a powerful woman, whether it was a man or a woman. But I remain a big drag fan, and if you read my blog, Crushing Crisis, one of the regular features over the past couple of years has been covering RuPaul's Drag Race, which Bendis was a contestant, and also some other drag stuff. So that's totally unrelated to comic books, but I just happened to have this shirt on and I couldn't help but talk about it. I doubt we're going to pull a comic book out of this stack that has a thematic connection to drag, but boy would that be interesting. Oh yeah, no connection to drag whatsoever. Although I will say this, this is totally unrelated to these comics, but I read at some point about how Emma Frost is usually illustrated, White Queen, and now she's drawn as very, very pretty and this kind of like blonde bombshell. But if you think to older Emma Frost, she was drawn as very severe, and I read at some point an artist saying the way that you get that classic Emma Frost look is you actually draw her with very masculine features. Like she has this beautiful body and this blonde hair, and but her face is actually like a very kind of chiseled masculine face, and that's what made her look the way that she looked. I thought that was really interesting. So, totally unrelated to drag and Emma Frost. This is the first block of Bendis Avengers with one sort of semi-related book mixed in. So this is Avengers Disassembled, and then the disassembling of other Avengers in the franchise, and then the first 2 new Avengers volumes. So Avengers Disassembled, we've spoken about this a little bit before, but I never tire of digging into it. Just this idea that Bendis basically just got to do whatever he wanted with Avengers. And, you know, we think of him as this huge star right now. I mean, recently the news broke that he's leaving Marvel for DC, and what a big deal that is. At the time, he was kind of a big deal. He'd been writing Ultimate Spider-Man, he wrote Alias, he had been writing Daredevil, but he wasn't like, he hadn't been put in charge of the big toys in the way that he has been now. So this was really weird to just like give him Avengers and say, do whatever you want. And he does it in spectacular fashion. I mean, this just will catch your breath in your throat if you're an Avengers fan, because he just so quickly does so many terrible things to Vision, to She-Hulk, to Hawkeye. And here's the thing, a lot of terrible things have happened to a lot of Marvel characters, and it's like, just because a few people died and there was an attack or whatever, does that mean the Avengers are over? It doesn't have to. But this really causes the Avengers to question what it means to be Avengers, and if they really are kind of like doing the right thing, and if they really have what it takes to survive in the universe, which is a question that's answered in New Avengers. But that's what this is. This has now been reprinted both in the complete collections for Brian Bendis and also in the Brian Bendis Omnibus. It's very much a part of New Avengers rather than a part of the Avengers run that comes before. I also have in here this book called Avengers Disassembled. This is like a strange marketing ploy of taking the end of the series of the 3 trio of Avengers, Thor, Iron Man, and Captain America, and putting them into one volume to co-market to that volume coming out. They some of them have a sense of finality to them. I mean, they all were carrying the Avengers Disassembled banner at that time, but only Thor really gets like really disassembled because Thor goes through his Ragnarok, which we've spoken about on an earlier episode as we were unwrapping the Thor by JMS Omnibus, because Thor goes away for several years after this. Iron Man and Captain America, I mean, like, some stuff happens to them, but they get relaunched directly into other series, and kind of life goes on. So this doesn't really connect to any oversized books beforehand, and I think eventually Marvel is going to work their way through the Cap, Thor, and Iron Man series, all of which are the series that started in 1998, and will eventually just, except for the Captain American series that had been restarted already, eventually we're going to get those in oversized, and it's not going to feel the need to marry up to this book. So should you pick this up? I would say you should pick this up if you want to see what was happening with other Avengers at the time and you don't necessarily have an interest in like having the whole run of each of those Avengers on their own. That's why I have it on my shelf, and that's why it's a companion book to Disassembled. So, interesting, at some point we're going to unwrap Secret War. Not Secret Wars, but Secret War. And that is a Marvel event book, but it also goes between Disassembled and New Avengers because it happens kind of in the Avengerless gap, and it's Bendis playing with like what would happen in a world where there are not Avengers to have to deal with things, and Nick Fury is kind of exclusively dealing with that stuff. But then we start New Avengers. And New Avengers, look, I will talk some trash on Bendis, and I will talk some trash on his Avengers run, but this first New Avengers story is just a lot of fun. It's really, really hard to not enjoy it, no matter how much of a comics curmudgeon you are. This idea of like, what if some big bad stuff happened and there were no Avengers, and the X-Men are off doing whatever the X-Men do? Who would get assembled? Right? Like, does Captain America still feel beholden to do that? Yes. Does Iron Man still feel like he's got to show up? Yes. But who else shows up in a world where Hawkeye is gone, Scarlet Witch is gone, Vision is gone? You know, we've lost so much of the core of what we think of as Avengers. And so Cap puts together a team partly with intent, but partly out of convenience. And it's really interesting who winds up being on that team. Spider-Woman, Luke Cage, Wolverine, and Spider-Man. That is not a team, and also Sentry and the unnamed Ronin. So this story focuses just on the very beginning, which is there's a breakout from that super-powered prison that Marvel has off the coast of New York. What is it called? The Raft. And the superheroes need to chase down the supervillains, but there's no Avengers to do it. Spider-Man kind of gets roped into the Avengers because this is his turf anyway. And there's actually a companion book to this. It's not an oversized, called Spider-Man Breakout. That's a miniseries that kind of shows more of Spider-Man chasing down those people. So this is like a very different team of Avengers, and then Bendis kind of thrusts them into some interesting happenings that follow up on drama within S.H.I.E.L.D., but then also starts to tease the beginnings of like what role Spider-Woman has to play in the long term of the series, which is really interesting and plays itself out in 3 and 4, which we've opened previously. So that first book is from 1 to 10, and this second book is from 11 to 20, which covers the period of House of M and runs right up into the beginning of Civil War. So something that's interesting is House of M was very much self-contained. There are books that for a few issues decided to dip into the House of M continuity and kind of show what could happen there. Captain America did it for an issue, Uncanny X-Men did it for an arc. Avengers didn't touch it, partially because Bendis was writing that already, so he was telling the stories he wanted to tell, but because of the No More Mutants thing that happens at the end of House of M, there's a repercussion in the universe that the Avengers deal with, and it feels much more natural than the Avengers later getting into like X-Men-y stuff, because even though it's a very X-Men villain that Bendis picks up, and it's a very kind of X-Men thread, it's a natural outgrowth from House of M. It's the natural next story, and it feels like something the Avengers would tackle. So that's not one of the times that I have a problem with the Avengers kind of stepping in on the X-Men's business. I would say this beginning stuff of New Avengers is great. If you like Avengers, if you like Bendis, if you just want to read a good kind of in-continuity rock'em sock'em comic book run, I would absolutely recommend this. And you don't have to get the OHCs right now. All of the stuff I just plucked out is covered in the New Avengers by Bendis Omnibus, along with, I believe, we've established the contents of Volume 3, or there's complete collections now to get it in. I recommend it. It's good, and it's what made Avengers into the modern franchise that it is today. So, happy to have these books back. I'm sure that I will probably reread them at some point as I do an even grander Avengers reread. I've read all the way from Disassembled, in these hardcovers actually, from Disassembled all the way to the end of Bendis' Avengers reign in order to prep for reading my much maligned Avengers vs. X-Men. I think if I were to do another read, I would probably start as far back as Heroes Reborn or maybe Biziak taking over the Avengers. So here's the official shelving of the beginning of the Bendis era of Avengers. And as per normal, I don't think we can fit it all where it belongs, so we're just going to fit it where it can, and then I'll reshelf in between episodes. So this has been another episode of Crushing Comics. Thank you so much for watching, listening to me to talk about my drag enthusiasm, and also listening to me to talk about my comic book collection, which I am falling in love with all over again. Tune in next time for even more unwrapping. Thanks so much.